listening to the 14th source for all geeky and nerdy news and discussion, which means that you're listening to a podcast.
For all intents and purposes.
I am D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Esplin.
And we are your two overeducated, codependent nerd hosts, bringing you the things that we like to talk about, but filtered through inquisitive and critical lenses. An episode for Friday, January 27th, 2023. Oh, wow, this is actually... this is our final episode for January
2023.
It's crazy. That's okay. Sure. Time is fast, and as we get older, time, collapses. But we're just going ahead, moving forward. And with that in mind, Andrew, we have been on the ground following the development of this open game license that Wizards of the Coast has been developing. Anything new since we last discussed it?
I think the biggest thing is, when we discussed it in earnest 2 weeks ago, I think I'd said at the time that Wizards of the Coast had not responded. They did respond on Friday, or the day our episode dropped. In fact, a listener, made the comment. One of our listeners actually said that we had the force of the power to make them respond. Just by podcasting about it. But
put it in a review, please. Jesus. Yeah.
But really the big thing is they've now, at this point, as of last week, they have released OGL 1.2, draft. That they're saying, here's our new what we want to do, and it's open, for kind of, they have a survey up.
Okay, so as we had predicted or had heard, they're doing the survey route.
They're doing the survey route.
How's that going?
I don't know. I'm not participating. I think the big thing is the story is now appearing in a lot of but it's showing up in a lot more places. A lot more people are talking about it. When the Washington Post and like the New York Times have an article about Dungeons and Dragons in the OGL, eek. So I think the real thing is they're still sitting in a bad press quagmire. I think some people are content with where they say they're going with 1.2, but there's a lot of people who see that there's certain things that they seem unwilling to concede, and at this point, I think there's no trust. There's a lot of people who say, like, don't believe them. They're going to screw you down the road. Like, that is the narrative I see a lot more. And right. I think why now a lot of people are more actively interested in new material and games from other companies. And hey, Monty Cook Games has said that they're selling more copies of the Cypher system. Paizo has actually said that they just did a reprint. And they're getting books out as quick as they can.
And they're specifically developing an OGL too?
The Orc. It's the
that's right. Yes,
something role playing open role playing creative license. Yeah.
Was the problem there?
And then they have their army of orcs, right? The orc,
indeed.
Which is, and the idea that this license, this concept, is a lot of other publishers have actually signed on saying, yes, we think this is how it should be.
Do you think that dilutes the field at all, though? Because D&D has and WotC has created such a nexus point for people getting into tabletop role playing game.
Well, it's and without getting too much into detail, I feel like we're looking. It's comparable to a certain extent to what happened in the 90s with TSR kind of floundering with D&D and the proliferation of games like World of Darkness, companies like Pinnacle Entertainment Group making Savage Worlds, or Deadlands rather. I think what we're going to see is more companies getting their foot really into the industry outside of the shadow of 5th edition D&D.
Right.
Or similar to 2009 when Wizards tried this exact same gambit before. And it led to, although 4th edition D&D still sold, this is literally where Paizo came from, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Literally, what they're doing now is at this point, to me, is become indistinguishable from what happened in 2009, with the exception now that a lot of the things they wanted to do in 2009 are more feasible, like really pushing a virtual tabletop and online play. And now it very much seems that their executives all come from online video game background, so
right, that's been
the push.
A common complaint there. Like, they're trying to make this into like a video game.
Yeah, if they could make you pay to play D&D per session, I have no doubt they would. That's, and I think that's the kind of thing that also, when I talk about a lack of trust, that's what we're really looking at. Right. But anyway,
it's interesting. I guess the last question I have is, and maybe this is obvious. Have you looked at what WotC released?
I glanced a little bit at it. I'm kind of I'm to the point where I think they've, I think my favorite article is someone wrote where the headline was basically nobody could dethrone Dungeons and Dragons except Wizards of the Coast, and they may have just done that. I don't trust them to do anything right anymore. I assume what they're going to do will let them do whatever they want. They're going to be able to cancel your project if they don't like it. Mm-hmm. I know the most recent iteration keeps the clause that they can cancel the license if they don't like what you're doing. Like if they don't like that you're doing something that's inappropriate or whatever. Well, yeah, they've already taken LGBT content off the DMs Guild, right? So they made it very clear that inappropriate content includes, I don't know, being gay. So you know what? I'm done with them. They can go straight to wherever it is you go, the 7th level of hell or the demi plane of dread or wherever they go. But anyway, enough about that nonsense.
Yeah, let's clean the palette here and talk about things that are actually cool by discussing our respective weeks in geek. So Andrew, if you don't mind starting, which I ask all the time, what was your specific week in geek this week?
So it's a bit of a bifurcated thing here. So I had this
Wizards of the Coast, right?
Yeah.
No.
So I was I for years and years and years I've had this idea of a role playing game I want to build, design a tabletop role playing game that I wanted to design, and it had multiple inspirations, and one of them was Fallout 4. Specifically, like the idea of being a settlement on the fringe of civilization, people just struggling to survive. And I wanted to focus on this idea of the emergent narratives of just having people struggling to survive.
But in a tabletop setting.
In a tabletop game, yeah. I was thinking a lot also about, I had this running app, Zombies Run, which had a story about zombies. And it's the same idea. On the show before, too. Yeah, of what people, like, what the stories that come from just, we need to get supplies, but also a game. And so to do research, I was like, well, I realized like zombie stories are very popular, post-apocalyptic stories as well. So I was like, oh, let me just start looking into it. And so I started watching a TV show, a brand spanking new TV show.
Oh, really?
It's called The Walking Dead.
Wait. Well, I got some bad news for you.
Yeah.
Because that show's actually, I'm out of the loop. It's either done or about to be so.
I think it's done, but they have a spin-off coming out, and
well, they've already had a spin-off going.
Oh, they have another
Fear
one coming
of the Walking. What? Okay, sure.
Yeah,
sure.
No, I mean they've AMC's got a franchise, but so I started watching the first season of The Walking Dead, which I've never seen. I remember it used to be the bee's knees.
That first season is great.
I was shocked to discover that the show literally just ended like in the last 6 months. Like I was like, oh my gosh.
Right. The Queen died and then The Walking Dead ended. Coincidence? I think not.
But it is funny to watch it and to, I think for me, without going into much, I've only seen like 3 episodes. So I'm really early on. And there's very similar, kind of themes that you see in a lot of these zombie survival, which is what I wanted to get at. The idea, these kind of like I think what's a 3rd or 4th episode, they're talking about going back into Atlanta to among other things to get a bag of guns, right, and potentially save the guy from Guardians of the Galaxy, right? But just that idea of like going to get a bag of guns, that's the adventure, that's the session, that's the
the loot.
So it is interesting. I think the one thing I'll say about the show, watching it now 12 years after it started.
Oh God, please don't tell me that number. Yeah, okay.
The cast. Just to see some of these people where I'm like, well, shit. I recognize. I mean, right? And it's only the first season. So, let's see. Who do I get? Sonequa Martin Green. All right. Of Star Trek Discovery. Let's see. The fellow that plays the Punisher in the Marvel Netflix shows.
Yep, John Barenthal.
Let's see, who is that? Again, the guy from Guardians of the Galaxy was
Michael Rooker.
And then Norman Reedus. Yondu. Norman Reedus, who I know only because of that Hideo Kojima game.
Yeah.
But like,
Hideo Kojima's like strange like fascination with Norman Reedus is like we can almost see his dick in this game, and then we'll also name him Norman. Well, no, not Norman, but Sam Bridges, who builds bridges.
Yes.
God, we could talk about Hideo Kojima and his weird problems, but yeah.
So it's just weird to watch a show like this and realize it was big, right? Like I remember being like at work in 2011, people talking about it, right?
Right.
So so that was an interesting thing, and the reason why I mentioned it is I wanted to kind of see the themes of and kind of the ideas of what I like being able to do. A role playing game I really love, Spectaculars, which I've spoken about,
right.
Which is a superhero game, was always very good at saying, "Hey, this is like this," and referencing a comic book character or comic book story. So I was kind of let me do research on different zombie things. Let me do research on post-apocalyptic things. I also have a list I'm making of post-apocalyptic movies to watch and other kind of, people on the fringe of civilization type of stories. So, but this leads directly into the other thing I'm doing, which I'll probably spend more time on.
Right. Well, before we go into there, I want to talk about like that first season of Walking Dead, because like it's forgotten in the malaise that is the Walking Dead phenomenon. Mm-hmm. In that Walking Dead became a cultural touchstone because of what was established in that first season. But that first season was like a weird, how do I want to say this? It was like the TV venture of like people that make quote unquote quality movies. In that it was a TV project spurred on by the director Frank Darabont, who had done like the Stephen King adaptation of The Green Mile, who had done oh gosh, was he involved in the Shawshank Redemption? I might be wrong there, but like he had credibility, and he's like, I want to make a TV show about this comic book. He'd done The Mist as well, which actually features like 90% of like the Walking Dead cast. It was basically like a casting call for The Walking Dead. If you want to, like, The Mist is actually a pretty good movie. But it's like, if you've seen The Walking Dead, you're like, oh, I see what happened here. It was almost like, oh, like fancy director is now making a TV show. Before that was popular. Mm. And to the point where like I have on DVD the first season of The Walking Dead that also has, because they're really leaning into that auteur kind of aspect, not to bring up Hideo Kojima again, but like that sort of auteur kind of aspect of what this show is leaning into, that like it also has like a black and white version of every episode.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so like that first season specifically is like a weird anomaly separate from what the show becomes, because the show just becomes, and this might get people mad at me, but like, let's be real. The show becomes primetime soap opera.
I mean, it's a CW show.
It becomes like, I want to watch my stories of people eating other people's faces, right? And but that was not necessarily, I mean, I guess it was the intent, because everybody that creates a TV show wants it to last forever. But it was more like, oh, this like highfalutin director is making a TV show based on a comic book series, but it's going to be classy because it's a highfalutin director. Yeah. And it's a fascinating sort of like case study in a weird way of like, what was the intent versus what it became. And personally, I wonder how long you're going to last, because I didn't last too long. Right. I think I lasted through season 4, where I decided to call bullshit on everything. But I actually, ironically, because of Facebook, and it's like, it's like this day in history kind of reminders. I've actually recently seen posts come up going like, I think it was season 2, where I said, I'm done with The Walking Dead. This is bullshit. And it's interesting. It's an interesting show. It's an interesting phenomenon. I'm really interested to see what your tolerance is. But that being said, it's not the only thing that's been feeding that need for you.
Well,
what else has there been?
It's funny because as I start watching this show in December, actually, so this was a month ago. I also was, it was kind of during my Christmas break time. I reached out to
holiday break, winter break,
winter break. Sorry. Well, I do work for a Catholic university, so
fair. That's fair.
So I was playing board games online with a friend of mine. And I was describing this. I was saying, like, this is this role-playing game idea I had. And I was saying, I started watching The Walking Dead because I wanted to kind of get some, do a little, like, research on the themes. And I'll probably, I have movies I want to watch, too. And he's like, and as I'm describing what I wanted from this game that I've been thinking about in the back of my head for, like, 5 years. I have notes going back to 2016. So it's actually been more than 5 years.
Survival and, like, personality management as well as, like...
it's a certain amount of like how would a game of survival in limited resources, how would I want to see it? Again, originally was thinking about Fallout, but now in a grander sense. And my friend looks at me, he's like, "Well, have you played State of Decay?"
Oh,
and I'm like,
"Oh my god!"
And I'm like, "I don't know what that is. What is that?" He tells me, "Well, it's free on Xbox Game Pass in December, right?" And I'm like, well, what is it? He describes it. I'm like, you're talking about the game I'm telling you,
I
friend.
know,
like,
yeah.
So I go, and I find it on sale on Steam, and I start playing State of Decay 2.
Yeah, that's probably the better one to start with, yeah.
Yeah, well, because the game is like from 2018. State of Decay 1 is from like 2012, right?
Yeah.
But I just start playing it, and I'm like, wow, there's so much, like, literally it's not a perfect match of what I was saying.
No,
like,
of course not.
As a video game, it captures all the ideas. In fact, actually even accentuates ideas or gives me ideas I hadn't thought of, like, the way that, like, they have kind of, like, character traits that are really random, but they have an effect and all this, and these random stories that pop up where, like, suddenly this lady's talking about
into that emergent gameplay that you're interested in. Yeah, yeah.
And they do that after I started playing this game, and it was like I was a couple tens of hours in, and like I realized like I had these characters. I'm like, yeah, I like know these characters, like not know them, but like I'm thinking about these characters as characters that were designed, and then I realized, but no, they were entirely random, and the story I'm stuck on is the one that I made.
Yes. Oh my god, this is perfect for you. Actually,
so it is. It was this really, and it's just been this thing where, and I've been playing State of Decay 2, quite a bit since, and I'm really, it's this idea of how much it does some of these things that I was really interested in.
It's really interesting because it's all built around that emergent gameplay system, and like the thing is they've set it up so that yes, these characters. I mean, I'll have you explain how the game works in a bit, but like. I haven't played it. I've actually found it engaging enough that I've watched a couple playthroughs of it, and I'm surprised we actually haven't talked about it at all before, but I found it fascinating. But like the idea that it creates characters, but there must be obviously some sort of limiter or some kind of system there to mediate these characteristics. But like it generates a world full of characters that you come across that you can save, work with, kill,
or go to war with.
Yeah. But like all the characters are procedurally generated.
Yes,
for like a better word. And like to have that system and have it work sounds daunting on a creative level. But it tends to work. And again, for the couple playthroughs I've seen of State of Decay 2 specifically, it's been fascinating to watch, and especially as someone that likes to design games and think about creating games, I'm really interested to hear your perspective on what this game is doing.
So, to provide context, so State of Decay 2, I don't know about the first one. I have nothing to say about the first one. So the State of Decay 2...
it's similar in like the basic concept, I should say.
But I think the first one had more of a story, and then the non-story stuff was later, where actually State of Decay 2 started with no story mode, and I think added a story mode as part of one of the the expansions. Mm-hmm. So it's basically, it is the idea that you are a group of survivors. In the first time you play, they have a tutorial now that's like you basically pick a pair of people, and there's 4 pairs, which you think they're all pre-made, but in fact they're all being randomly generated with an overlay of like their connection to each other, right? And it's the idea that these two people have escaped. It's kind of one of these 3D follow camera action games. These two people have escaped. It's a zombie apocalypse. They've escaped to a military base only to discover the military's not there, that they've already left. Right. So they end up meeting these two characters meet a soldier and a doctor who've remained behind, and you basically end up saying, hey, we got to get out of this base, there's too much going on, and you flee to the nearby town, where you basically set up a camp in a nearby location, in a little house or whatever the map is. There's like 5 maps in the game, so they all have different arrangements of things. But like, for example, I think when my first game, it was you settle in it's like a ranger station near a national park. So there's a little place with beds. There's a whatever, and then it's like, all right, well, now go, like, survive. And the game directs you, like, there is kind of a mission to clear the main part of the zombie threat from this map, from the whole map, right? Which you do by defeating these things called plague hearts, which are part of the zombie plague. But really, it's just like you'll just be playing like, hey, we need food. Okay, go search local places for food, or you may like get a call from someone who needs help, like a survivor that needs you to go help them. You'll have other kind of people call in. You'll meet people driving around. You explore the town. So it is just kind of like the game is just kind of like, all right, go. And your primary focus is just keeping your people alive, making sure they're happy and fed. You get the frictions of like, when something bad happens, morale goes down.
Right.
Stuff
there's
like
even
that.
like a high, but then don't forget the zombie portion of things.
Oh, there's zombies.
There's
zombies.
hierarchies of zombies that like there's screamers, and there's like
So there's kind of the standard zombies, the standard walker, if you want to use that parlance. But then there's screamers who scream, and that attracts more zombies.
Yes.
There are
Very
juggernauts, which are giant, massive beasts. Bloaters, who are kind of these big gas bag guys that when you shoot them, they explode in toxic gas. And ferals, who are kind of this fast feral zombie that chase after you. So there are other kinds of zombies, and they're kind of the special ones that you run across as you travel the map looking for supplies. Yep. Part of it's that you also, I say you had a little like house or a base. You slowly develop it, right? You build facilities, you build beds or an infirmary.
Because it's about resource gathering as well as But I also like the I guess it's technically resource management, but also like what I mean by that is like making sure everybody's happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, like, for example, you may have a thing where, and you could move your base, especially once you get more survivors that join your community. You think, oh, I need to move somewhere larger, right? So you can go find a bigger place to move into, like maybe the nearby fire station, or maybe fire department station, or maybe you move to the lumber mill, or
there are vehicles, from what I remember.
Yeah, there are vehicles. Yeah, you drive around. Fuel is one of the resources, and and the characters, it is uncanny because like once you play it enough, you definitely see the little chunks and the bits of things that like of where it's where the procedures come from. But like it is, like I'm playing the game the first time, and one of the characters is like, "Hey man, my aunt is a prepper, and she used to live near here. I think we should go check out her place." So you can go to that character, and they have a quest now, or a little mission to go to their aunt's house, and it's actually like a 4 or 5 part mission.
Yeah.
And I think they actually, some of them have like branches they can go certain ways. Like one of the guys says, "Hey, my cousin is a cop in town. I wonder, I wonder if he's still here. Maybe because he'd be able to help us if he's still alive." And you kind of go on this multi-part search for him. And when I finally found it, like I found this guy's brother or cousin, and they joined my community. And the funny thing is, it's like, even though it doesn't mean anything, they both have, one of their traits is brother of the other guy.
Oh, wow.
Right. So it's like this idea that like now forevermore, they're brothers, and even though that's just a random thing, and some of these traits, and like they'll have a little backstory. Sometimes you'll be driving around, like, cause you can, hey, other guy, come with me. We're going to go searching for supplies. They'll start talking. They'll like have little lines of dialogue, like, "Hey man, I never really liked playing sports or whatever." And then sometimes that'll uncover a trait that was hidden.
That's crazy.
So you'll suddenly know that like, hey, this person has this trait, and then of course it has some effect.
Oh, sure, of course. Yeah.
And again, there's a limit to it. Once you hear some of these things a few times, you're like, oh, okay, yeah. But just that idea of that kind of stuff and how these, these characters that are being randomly generated, they form a little community. And then the missions of, like, I had one guy who ended up being a real great guy. I loved it. He was doing all the good missions, and he went out to take down a plague heart and didn't come back. Right.
Those are rough missions, though. So
and it's that thing where, and then the game shows when shows my little community, you see a gravestone in the background.
Yep. Yes, you do. Right. It's really upsetting.
And everyone was sad for a while, and I was bummed because there's no like load. Nope. There's no save. Like,
you can't save scum it. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't save scum it. Like it's like playing XCOM on Iron Man mode. And actually, I have been thinking about that kind of feeling as well of the you're playing XCOM on Iron Man mode. And you get really attached to these characters. And then like, Bobby didn't make it back from that mission.
Right. That's when you realize you should stop naming characters after your friends.
Right. Exactly. Which is what I stopped doing. But so no, I'm just, it is this interesting thing of how me thinking about a role playing game, and of course motivated really by the whole OGL nonsense of like, maybe I should just make my own game system and put it out there for people. Leads me to watching The Walking Dead, then leads me to a discussion with a friend that leads me to playing State of Decay, where I'm like, oh my gosh, someone made the game I've been thinking about for 7 years. And I'd never heard of it.
I have a couple questions. One of them I think is not necessarily for the podcast. That makes it sound more naughty than it is actually. But like, that question is something we could talk about off the air, but I'll say it out loud. Like, are you specifically interested in making a zombie game? But the question I had more is coming from like as a creative, which is like, you're talking to that friend who I should say is not me. No, but the person that recommended State of Decay 2, as a person that was kind of developing kind of this idea of the kind of game you wanted to make, learning that there was a video game that was doing a lot of those things, was it deflating at all? Was it inspiring at all? Like, how did you process that as a person that was kind of in the midst of developing or thinking about developing your own system and your own game?
So there's one point where I after playing the game for like several days, I said, well, apparently I'm just thinking about the State of Decay tabletop role playing game now. Sure. Like, and
does that exist yet?
No, not that I'm aware of. Although interestingly, a Walking Dead role playing game is coming out later this year. But to the point of zombies. I went to zombies because it was a place where this kind of survival against dangers thing. My idea was just any type of setting, like I said, Fallout as well, right? You're a little farm in the middle of the atomic wasteland. Again, the same thing. It's right. You'd be going to old markets and old places. You'd be scavenging supplies. You'd be doing what you can to survive.
It could be zombies. It could be radioactivity. It could be taxes.
It could be taxes. Yeah. So I think that was the kind of thing, but really playing State of Decay definitely, got me thinking about a lot of things of like, especially the things where they did things that I wanted, like, or that I liked. And then some areas where, of course, because I think of a tabletop game, there's certain things about that wouldn't work. Right. But and how the things I had already thought of, I would implement them, and how that could work. But yeah. So
perhaps like it being a video game was less deflating than if someone had said like, oh yeah, there's a tabletop game that already does this.
I mean, yeah. And honestly, if there was a tabletop game that already did this, shit, like I'll admit, once I saw there was a Walking Dead game come out, I got on the mailing list because I want to know, are they doing what I want? Because I've actually looked into other games like this and especially the parts about kind of the focusing on a community and groups of survivors or settlers, that part you don't see as much. Because I think a lot of games tend to still build off of the it's D&D but with lasers, right? Like, so I think there isn't, there are some more indie games that get closer, but none that I've not seen any that do what I'm trying to do. Which I'm not trying to say I'm original, right? I think most of the tabletop role playing game is pretty, not reductive, but it's we're all really just swirling the same pot of mess and calling it our own.
That being said, everything we've discussed here is copyright Andrew Esmond.
Yeah, so it has been a real experience, and just to find this game that, like I said, is like, oh my gosh, like it's funny thinking back to the conversation with my friend where he literally was like, I think you might want to try this game,
right? And you know what he or she, I don't know who it was, but like they're like, oh, do I say it? Do I tell him?
So it was, it's. I'm glad I had the opportunity. I'm still playing it.
I think State of Decay 3 is on the way as well.
They announced, I think they did like a trailer for it several years ago. And it's still like in the pipe somewhere. And I'd love to see where they go with it. I think the things to me that are interesting are the things that are not as like the little stuff, like the idea that they could explode State of Decay 2 for me just by adding, more of these random traits that have weird effects, more of these like, these mini quests or these little character storylines, just having those pop up. Like every time there's one that I haven't seen, I'm like, oh wow. Or there's also other survivor storylines. Like while you meet some other camps that are people that are, that just kind of have basic quests or whatever, there are certain storyline ones where it's like, oh, like for example, one of them, I was playing a game where this community, it was a little bit weird that they kept asking for weird stuff, and
is it a cult? Did you support a cult, Andrew?
No, so it's actually they're cannibals.
I mean,
and it's this thing where it's funny because there was something I heard about cannibals. Like I think because there's sometimes you get radio commentary from the like other people in other places, and someone mentions about cannibals, and then suddenly I meet these guys. It's like it was prepping me for it, right? And it gets to the point where like they're trying to kidnap people, and then like they give you they give you a bag of free food, and if you bust open the bag, it's got jewelry in it, like it's got a wedding ring in it. You're like, oh, that's a weird thing.
My god.
Little micro stories when they all weave together really have made for an interesting gameplay experience for me. Even when the game itself isn't always perfect, I have so much joy in kind of these little things, these little gimmicks and whatnot, and it gets me thinking about, especially given that all these other people now are making their own role playing game systems. It does, like, I'm like, I guess let's just do it and see what happens.
For sure.
So yeah, I've kind of had this zombie filled week in geek, or month in geek, really, because it's been the two kind of have been going on since the end of December.
You've been so secretive lately. Like, Andrew, are you into zombies? And you've been so like distracted and like, no, of course not. What are you talking about?
No, of course not. No. But anyway, so that was my week in geek, Dan. What about you?
I'm going to talk about some zombies.
Oh my goodness.
Right? I mean, it's really kind of a zombie episode. I'm not lying either. Although it's not like zombies as you know and love them. Instead, I'm going to talk briefly, because, I mean, there's not a whole lot to talk about. Maybe. I'm going to talk about the first episode of The Last of Us for HBO. Based on the
award-winning video game by Naughty Dog.
Apparently the best video game story ever made, which is a whole different controversy, especially on social media, that we've ever seen, by Naughty Dog Entertainment, who also did like the murder simulator game, as we like to call it here, but also what we mean by that is Uncharted.
Uncharted, yeah.
The Last of Us was like Naughty Dog's, I don't want to say R-rated Uncharted, but like this is like for the adults. Right? Which
is funny because murdering thousands of people with firearms is not R-rated, but
right. But no, this is serious. This is serious, Andrew. We're talking about like serious things like death and despair, which is also caused when you murder a lot of people.
I mean, Nathan Drake has probably got some pretty impressive therapy bills, right?
So, I'm actually a big fan of the Last of Us games, to the point where I was like, when they announced The Last of Us Part 2, having played Last of Us Part 1, I'm like, this doesn't feel right. And then I waited a long time to play Last of Us 2, not because of any moral, well, kind of, because Last of Us 2 released right before, I believe, or at the beginning of, I don't know if you've heard of this, the COVID epidemic. And I'm like, I really don't want to play a game about an epidemic in the middle of one
during an epidemic.
Yeah, I was kind of wishy-washy about that, but I did get around to it, and actually one of the few cases where they earned their place as a sequel. They did incredible work with it. Naughty Dog has come a long way, especially as a proprietary developer, specifically for Sony, to really kind of lean into that sort of first-person video game experience of like, we're here to tell a story, and the player is a part of that story to the extent that not just you're playing through you're not playing through the plot, but like you're in with us to like bend even like control schemes when we want things to slow down, that when specific options are available to you, sometimes you have a lot of options, sometimes you have few, and you're really just kind of advancing not necessarily just the plot, but like just the experience of the story. And while that can seem limiting in one aspect, I think for me it's like it's a guided experience that is very cool, especially if the story is good. And I would say generally for the video games, the story for The Last of Us have been very good, especially the second one does some really interesting things, although it is very dark. If like The Last of Us Part 2 is a game I really enjoyed that I cannot recommend. Especially well, it's a zombie apocalypse. You can kind of examine this or figure out the scenarios that they decide to probe. But it's very dark and very brutal. But it's very good. That being said, when they announced there's going to be a Last of Us show on HBO, I'm like, uh-oh, that sounds like Trauma 2.0. And I did not watch it when it premiered. I guess I watched it within the week that it premiered. But I did watch the pilot, which is a long pilot. It's about an hour and a half.
Okay.
Starring Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey as Joel and Ellie, respectively. Both of whom I have enjoyed the previous work of. Pedro Pascal, of course, has made waves as being the Mandalorian in
sometimes
in The Mandalorian. Bella Ramsey has actually, I think, had a bit more, recently speaking, a more varied career as just like the child badass from the Game of Thrones show. I know her best from being Hilda in the Hilda animated series. She was also recently in, oh gosh, what was the name of the movie? It was a weird historical drama. Christ. It wasn't Christ. In the historical drama, Catherine Called Birdie, which is kind of based on historical events, but also very goofy and weird. I've loved everything she's in. Pedro Pascal doesn't have any, marks on his record either. But the thing is this: the thing that stuck with me the most going into the show, because I don't have any real thesis on it yet, because only one episode. Well, as of this recording, two episodes have aired. The biggest thing I was kind of thinking about, and I think has been the biggest thing to take me out of it, is that, as you know, having played a fair amount of the Uncharted games, I think at least the first two.
So many people, I just don't remember.
Fair. And you've just gone numb from all the violence and all the death. And I've played the Last of Us games, and I've only played the first Uncharted game. Well, no, and the last, well, not the last one, but the spin-off, Uncharted Lost Legacy, which that was my first Uncharted game. Very good. But the thing is with Naughty Dog games is that they're really into photorealism, and their characters look a certain way. And I should make it clear that they do a lot of motion capture of the actors that they hire, but the facial model, the models of the characters themselves aren't based necessarily always on the faces of the actors. But they're photorealistic in a way, so like I know what Joel looks like in The Last of Us. I know what Ellie looks like in The Last of Us and The Last of Us Part 2 because they're both in the second game. Spoilers, I guess. To the point where like this kind of watching the pilot episode at first kind of felt like a play or like a fan movie. It was like, oh, this is adorable. But I will say this. The first episode was very, very good. It was a long episode, like I said, but it went by really quickly and did a really good job. And I think, well, I'll save this for later, but did a really good job of expanding what the game does in a way that makes for a good TV show, which is something that we've talked about in the past about like adaptations. Mm-hmm. And what makes a good game does not make a good TV show. What makes a good comic doesn't make a good TV show. What makes a good movie doesn't make a good comic, because they're different genres, different mediums with different expectations and tools available to them. And I think that's especially surprising considering that Neil Druckmann, who's one of the creators of The Last of Us, is one of the co-creators, I believe, of the show.
The Last of Us.
Yeah. And so like there's a skeptical part of me is like, oh, this guy just wants to break out into screenwriting, right? Which we've seen with over at Ubisoft, or not Ubisoft, but who's the guy that did the BioShock, Ken Levine, I think that's his name. He's like, oh, I'm writing screenplays now, but then none of those movies were good. and so like, well, I guess I'm making video games again. That being said, like, it seems like Neil Druckmann, along with the team that he has surrounded himself with, is making good TV. It's a good TV show. And I think the biggest question I had going into it was, and this links to what you were talking about, what place does this show have in a post-Walking Dead world? Because it's trading, I think, on a lot of what made The Walking Dead popular, which is it's focusing on characters. You know, the humans are the Walking Dead.
Right.
You know, the humans are the monsters, not the zombies. But what I think is really interesting, and again, spoiler alert, I guess, but it's not really, is that they do a really interesting job leaning into the pandemic and trading on those fears and anxieties that we had at the beginning of like, we don't know where this is coming from. We don't know what makes us safe from it. But in the show, nothing makes us safe from it.
Right.
You know? So it's like, especially 2 years out from this pandemic, you know, the COVID pandemic starting, it's quaint in the sense like, okay, we know where it's from and we know how to fight it. But what if there's a world where we never found that out, you know? Mm-hmm. And to me, maybe enough time has passed where I can enjoy a show like this. But that being said, the writing is really good. The casting is fantastic. Anna Torv is in it, which is kind of all I needed to know from Fringe, the main actress from Fringe, who always needs more work. She's also fantastic in the Netflix show Mindhunters. The only thing, and I'm not the only person to notice this. I was glad I wasn't the only person to notice this because I felt very alone otherwise. I don't know, because Joel in the game has a very, I think played by, oh God, what's the voice actor's name? Troy Baker, I believe? Or it's him or the other one. I can't remember. Honestly. But like, Pedro Pascal is trying to put on the sort of, Joel has a very like Southern kind of accent on him. And Pedro Pascal's putting that accent on his voice. And I can't, it's nothing against the show, nothing against the actors. It's just, it's a blending of these two tones. Pedro Pascal in The Last of Us sounds exactly like Nathan Fillion. And that's like all I can hear.
Waiting for it.
That's all I can hear. That's all I can hear. He's just doing Captain Mal from Firefly. And you know what? Even though that's all I can hear, there's a part of it's like, I'm okay. I'm okay with that. I miss Captain Mal, right? And it's good. It's a very good show. And especially speaking to you directly, Andrew, for a person that's kind of miring himself in that kind of narrative, I think it could be a good show for you to dive into, especially for a slightly different view on that kind of survival storyline. Because yes, they're zombies, but it's instead of like some nebulous virus, it's a different kind of natural phenomenon of fungus, right? Cordyceps. Yeah, and it's something that's very, very real and kind of scary in its own way. It's cool. It's a good show. I like it.
Well, and it's definitely something I look forward to watching. I just discovered they're actually releasing the game, The Last of Us Part 1, on Steam.
Estema.
In March. So
that's the remake of the first one.
Wait, we're 2 remakes.
Okay, yes. Okay, Last of Us Part 1. The original Last of Us came out at the end of the PlayStation 3's lifespan. And so when PlayStation 4 came out, they did an HD re-release. Right. And so what they did now, though, is that they literally, from the top down, remade the game using the Last of Us Part 2 engine. And for 4K and UHD and all that fun stuff.
Well, yeah, no, and so it's probably something I'll also... try to play, although it's an interesting question of do you play the game or do you watch the TV show first? I don't know. I'll probably end up watching part of the TV show first.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing that's stopping you from the TV show is that it's just started, and without having all the episodes there, it makes it a harder commitment for some people. And but I think, because I know you're very specific about the video games you play in a lot of ways. I would actually recommend the show for you because it seemed to be a good distillation of what the games are without actually having to play the games for 60 hours, right? Because also The Last of Us does not tickle any of the other fancies that you particularly like, of like crafting and building and like the minutia of character interaction. No, it doesn't. It's a straightforward narrative game, right? And it's not really nuanced in that way. It's like, we have a story to tell, and we're going to take you through that story. So don't expect Fallout 4. Don't expect Fallout 3.
Are you sure? I know the reason you say that is because on Steam they say if you pre-order it, you get parts to upgrade your weapons and craft stuff. And I'm like thinking.
Yeah, no, there is crafting, but like, I'm out of bullets. I need to make more bullets. That's it. I can craft a better handle for my gun. I've crafted a better. It's not Fallout 4 level shit that we're talking about here, but
well, certainly not. We'll see how it goes. Though.
It's really not. Considering I'm not a crafting guy, I found it completely tolerable. So. Take that for what you will. It's not a crafting building game at all. It's the story of Joel and Ellie.
Yeah, well, that's I decisions that are made. Too.
Do you though? You didn't like Willow? No.
Well, yeah. Anyway. If there was more crafting in Willow, I would have liked it better, right? That's
instead of just acorns that turn people into stone.
But it's good. No, I am. For many reasons, I'm interested to watch a show, in part because it's already in my wheelhouse of what I'm interested in. But also, adaptations of video games is always an interesting concept to me. And, I want to see where this one goes.
And that's a whole thing we could talk about probably at a later date. But the show is getting a lot of heat, not because of the show, but because of critics who are saying, like, finally, we made a good video game adaptation, right? And there's lots of people coming out there and they're going, like, there's, like, manga, or not manga, but anime since the 1990s that have been adapting video games that are all very good. So go fuck yourself. Like, there's an argument there. There's an argument here. There's an argument there. There's arguments everywhere. And ultimately, we can't judge how good the show is until it's done. So we might wait till then. But for now, it's a good opening episode. Not only as an adaptation of a video game, but I would say as a TV show. If you'd had no idea this was a video game, it's a good start to a pseudo zombie survival show, and like post-apocalyptic kind of thing. It's really interesting. It's an interesting world, and they've really captured what made that world interesting in the game and brought it to the show. So it's good stuff.
That's good. I'm excited to see it.
You'll never want to eat mushrooms again.
I never did anyway.
So if you, dear listeners, have any thoughts about the topics we discussed this week, feel free to leave your thoughts as comments on the page for this episode at forallintents.net.
You can also post your comments or engage in conversations with other listeners on our Facebook page.
You can find us on other social media as well, such as, well, at our respective social media networks at this point. You can find me on Instagram at dbethelcomics, and you can find Andrew on Mastodon at profounddark at dice.camp.
While you're at our website at forallintents.net, you can also take a look at our YouTube page, which you can get to by clicking on the link in the corner that says YouTube, or you may already be there because we do, in fact, broadcast our show on the YouTubes.
Boom.
If you are there and you're listening to it, feel free to like and subscribe, ring the bell, and you'll be notified every time we release a new episode.
We use 2 tracks of music for our show. One is called Disco Medusae, the other is called District 4. Both written and performed by Kevin McLeod of the Clan McLeod, immortal swordsman, graph paper enthusiast, and musician extraordinaire. You
can find his music at incompetech.filmmusic.io. That's all licensed under the Creative Commons 4.0 Attribution License.
If you like the show and like to help us out, the best way to do so would be to subscribe to the show using whichever podcasting service you happen to use. What would help us out even more, though, would be to leave some sort of review. Whether a text review or using their proprietary metric will help spread the word to new potential listeners through the magic of algorithms. Andrew, I have a correction to make. A fairly big correction as well. We talked about Willow last week.
Yeah, we did.
Which had a score by James Horner. And I said last week that they brought back James Horner to do some additional music for the show, which they had actually not done.
They hadn't done.
For a variety of reasons. The chief among them is that he is dead.
It has been for 7 years.
Yeah, he died in 2015 in a plane crash, which is sad. But no, they did not bring him back to write more music.
I mean, Disney's got some money, but they don't have that much money.
I mean, they can keep Walt Disney's head in a jar, but they can't bring back James Horner for Willow, apparently. So I apologize for my error. But the interesting thing is that the soundtrack for the Willow TV show is divided into 2 quote-unquote discs, for lack of a better word. One is just James Horner music, and I think it's rearranged. It's specifically rearranged. And the other is by the other composer, whose name I do not have in front of me, because I only bought the James Horner disc. Consequently, I went on to buy, out of guilt or out of joy, last year they re-released the soundtrack for Willow in an extended version, which I didn't own the Willow soundtrack in any form beforehand, but it was, by the time I ordered it a couple weeks ago, it was already out of print. So it took some extra money and some extra wait time for me to get it, but it is here. It is glorious, and I love it. And James Horner, thank you, and I'm sorry that you could not come back
to life
for the show. So that's my correction. Maybe next time. Maybe he'll be back for season 2. But I'm going to say probably not. So until you bring back your favorite composer from the dead, dear listeners, I'm D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplin.
And for all intents and purposes,
that was a podcast.
It's like, what, you know? Not sexual cannibalism.
Thank you.
Actually, I'm gonna go pee. You guys do what you need to do.
All right.
I'll BRB. Uh-oh. Are you eating... Hold on. Let me hear. Are you eating Cracker Jacks?
No.
Peanuts?
No.
You are definitely eating... Milk Nuts.
chocolate gold coins.
That was... Well...
Because
you ruined it because that was my next guess.
You could also engage in conversations with other listeners. You could also comment.
You got this, buddy. James Horny just entered the room.
Yeah, there's just someone outside yelling. It's okay.
Yellies, Andrew. Huggies, not yellies. Huggies.
Huggies? That's diapers.
Yeah, I know it's diapers. Thank you, Dan.
That's why when I give him hugs, they pull up his pants and give him a little wedgie.
Okay, let's stop that, please.
Dong, da, dong, dong, dong.
No, stop.
You gotta do Dr. Robotnik.
No,
do the laugh. Do the laugh.
Do
Do the laugh, Andrew.
You don't do the Eggman laugh. I'm not gonna leave.
I don't know the Eggman laugh.
You do it all the time.
I don't know that.
I mean, I can kind of confirm what Glenn's saying here, but...
Okay, thank you. All right. Whew.